Hey guys, Positive here, and today we're going to be ranking the Tier 8 mediums as requested by one person. But that's good enough for me, I'm a small channel. So, just a quick disclaimer, there are 4 tanks in this ranking that I am not including because I have not played them. So those are the O47, the T95E2, the T34-3, as well as the Panzer 58 and the 59 Patton, actually 5 tanks. However, those are fairly uncommon, so I don't think it'll be too big of an issue. And without further ado, let's get started. So coming in at the number 15 slot, it has to be the STA-1. I'm sorry, Japanese tank fans, but this is probably the worst Tier 8 medium. I mean, the problems start with the armor profile. So there's no armor anywhere. You're not going to balance anything at all. You're going to get HE down sides of the turret, rear. So that's a problem. And in addition to that, it's not very fast. Normally tanks with no armor are fast, like the CDC or the Lorraine, but the STA-1 caps out at 45 kilometers an hour. It's got very unspectacular effective power to weight ratios, so it doesn't really move around the battlefield. And so if it's slow and it's got no armor, you'd expect it to have a good gun, but the gun is very average for a Tier 8 medium. It's got mildly higher damage per minute than tanks like the Pershing, but it's not even close to being nearly what it needs to be for the STA-1 to really qualify as a good tank. In fact, it's so bad that I didn't even put my professional's camo on it, as you can see. Anyway, moving on. And coming in at the number 14 slot is the T26E4. This is basically what happens when you take a medium tank and you decide to give it all the bad characteristics of a heavy tank, along with all the bad characteristics of a medium tank. So basically what you end up with is you have a tank that has the low alpha of a medium tank, as well as the low penetration of a medium tank, and more or less the armor of a medium tank, to be honest. And then you give it the terrible mobility of a heavy tank, and then you also give it the poor gun handling of a heavy tank. And that's basically just the monstrosity of the T26E4. You don't really bounce many shots, like you think you would, but you really don't, because people with more than 200mm pen will just cheese through your front upper plate, your lower plate, your turret ring, and then people with less than 200mm pen will just cheese right through that really tall cupola area that sticks up above the mantlet. All in all, it's just not a good combo. I mean, the only real reason why I ranked it above the STA-1 is at least sometimes the armor works against noobs. But that's really about it. It's just not very good at anything. And coming in at the number 13 slot is the French FCM 50-ton, that Tier 8 premium medium. On PC, it's a heavy tank, but don't let that deceive you. There's still no armor on this tank. You've got 80 on the sides and 100 on the front, I think, but it's all very flat, so it's pretty easy for the enemy to pen. Although I will say the turret armor buff did help the turret a little bit, so you can sometimes bounce shots if you play a hold down in this tank now. But it suffers from more or less the same issues as the STA-1 in that it's got no turret armor and the gun is it's good, but it's still fairly mediocre. But really the big issue with the FCM is it's so big. It's very hard to take cover with this tank when the back sticks out so far, because it's got the size profile of a heavy tank, just minus the armor part. And the only real reason why I ranked this one also above the STA-1 is because at least this can sometimes bounce shots at the turret, the gun is overall a bit better, and it's a bit faster. And it makes credits, which is a nice bonus. But yeah, I don't really recommend picking this one up either. Although, I have to say, of all the premium tanks that you can buy for gold in the tech tree, it's probably the most entertaining to play just because it has mobility. But that mobility and decent penetration is about it. And rolling in at the number 12 slot is the Centurion 1, that British Tier 8 tech tree medium tank. What can I say? It's also pretty bad. Honestly, a lot of the Tier 8 mediums are kind of bad, and I actually had difficulty deciding which ones were less bad than the others. But what keeps the Centurion 1 in the basement is low mobility, 40 kilometers an hour. I mean, when it comes to the mobility, a lot of people say, oh, the British medium tanks, they might be limited by that speed limit, but they have good power to weight. Except that's more or less a myth. The Centurion 1 does not have that great of power to weight. People seem to believe that it'll go 40 no matter what. But going up this hill, you can see it's clearly not 40. It only just feels like it has high power to weight because you're just so limited by the fact that the tank only goes 40 kilometers an hour. Like the 5100 that I'm shooting at here also goes 40. He might actually go 45. Like in general, I feel like the 5100 is probably faster than this hunk of junk. In addition to that just awful mobility, you have terrible alpha. 190 is pitiful. It's the lowest at the tier. It's lower than the line tier 7, so you're going to have to put in 2-3 shots really to trade remotely effectively. And then it doesn't really have the same kind of DPM to back it up. I mean, the DPM is not bad, but it's still lower than tanks with substantially more alpha. Like, a lot of the 90mm arm tanks will have the same, if not more, the Panthers. Like, it's just bad. All it's really got is it's got great standard round penetration for a tier 8 medium. It's got a pretty solid accuracy as well, but that's just not enough, especially when you consider that the armor is not that great either. The hull is ginormous. It's also paper. I mean, you've got a nice mantlet, sure, but everything that's not the mantlet is such a liability. Heat shells will go straight through the forehead, and if they can't hit the forehead, people can shoot the cheeks, they can shoot the turret ring. Yeah, it's just problems everywhere. The only thing that keeps this from being higher than the other tanks is the mantlet will actually bounce shells. So and the DPM is still nice, which is the only reason why this thing even made number 12. Alright, this next ranking hurt my soul a little bit, but I had to put the T-34-2 at the number 11 slot. The thing about the T-34-2 is I feel like it's kind of a misunderstood tank. I mean, honestly, I think it's one of the more underrated tanks. I think it's the last good tank in the Chinese medium tree because it's got pretty solid mobility, actually. It's one of the faster tier 8 mediums. 400 alpha is fairly substantial for the tier, unlike at tiers 9 and 10. And the turret armor is pretty decent. All in all, like, it's not too bad, except for one thing. It has less DPM than heavy tanks. That is the major letdown of this tank, and it's why, according to WG's balance charts, this thing usually does horribly all the time. But I really loved it. I think it's like a great hit and run tank, but I just can't ignore the fact that this tank is hated by so many people. It just underperforms on the balance charts all the time, and all it comes down to is the fact that it has low DPM. That's really the only real drawback I can find, other than the fact that you can't really snapshot. And the turret, while good, it's not the best, I suppose, but it's certainly better than a lot of the other tanks that have been ranked below the T-34-2. So I'd really love to place this tank higher, but I really can't. It's just not possible. Next on our list is the Panther 88, coming in at number 10, that premium German medium tank. It's got an accurate gun. That's pretty much most of what I can say about it. This tank is all about the gun. The mobility it's about average for a tier 8 medium, I'd say. Tier 8 mediums are generally fairly sluggish, to be honest. The armor is pretty bad because it's really just tier 7 Panthers armor. It's the exact same armor profile, but the gun is nice. You've got pretty solid pen for a tier 8 medium, pretty solid accuracy, pretty solid DPM. The turret is not that good on this tank though, which can be a problem, especially when you're trying to brawl. It's like a sniper medium, except tier 8 mediums are just not very good at sniping, especially with that low alpha and very, very mediocre DPM, especially when compared to TDs, which is why I can't rank this tank any higher than it is. And in the number 9 slot, we have the Panther 88's tech tree brother, the Panther 2. It's basically the same tank, except the Panther 2 has slightly more turret armor and slightly less gun stats. I just felt like the gun stats on the Panther 88 were not good enough to justify losing that little bit of extra mantlet space at the Panther 2. So the Panther 2 is a little bit more efficient at these kind of close quarter fights that are oftentimes required at tier 8 against things like IS-3s, IS-5s, VK-100s, which is why the Panther 2 just narrowly edges out the Panther 88. Everything else is pretty much the same. And this is the part of the video where I'm going to take a lot of flack. I put the Mod 1 at number 8. I think the Mod 1 is massively overrated. This is the tank that a lot of YouTubers call overpowered because there just seems to be some sort of love affair with tanks that are quote-unquote like balanced. And by balanced, I mean like kind of like they have armor, they have firepower, they have mobility. Except this tank just doesn't do any of those things particularly well. I mean, people act like the Mod 1 is some sort of armored monster that rolls around the battlefield, but 120 millimeters of armor, even with the sloping, it's good. Don't get me wrong, it's good. it's just not that good, especially when the enemy's above you. They're going to have no problems penning it. They load gold, they're going to have no problems penning it. It's really not that good. And then on top of that, it doesn't have turret armor. It's got like 180, 190 millimeters of effective turret armor. So they're going to punch through that. And at tier 8, these medium tanks, you really need to have that hull armor. Especially considering you need to be able to hull down. The gun, it's not that good. The DPM is fairly mediocre. The alpha at 280 is nice, but 175 pen is awful. And when you load the gold, it's still awful. So this tank, especially once you throw in that poor gun handling this tank gets, it just struggles with tier 8 heavy tanks. And at tier 8, these medium tanks, you're going up against things like, again, IS-5s, 252Us, WZ-112-2s, VK-100s. You need to be able to deal with heavy tanks, and that's just something the Mod 1 can't do. And it's not even fast. If you had this gun and you put on something fast, it might be a little bit better. Actually, scratch that, it wouldn't be better. This gun is just bad. The tank is slow. The armor's massively overrated. Everything about this tank is overrated. Feel free to rage at me in the comments and call me a noob or something. Number 7, here's another controversial pick. The M4A1 Revolution. I probably butchered that, and my French accent is terrible. Regardless, so this tank has no armor, mediocre mobility. What's the secret? Because I rank tanks like the STA-1 and like the FCM, similar tanks, very low. And I think what sets the M4A1 Revolution apart from the rest is that the Revolution has 310 alpha and okay penetration. Which means that the Revolution can actually snipe. As you can see, I'm sitting on a TD hill, not really contributing much to the game, but you can snipe with this tank. You can sit from the back lines, and you can actually deal some damage, unlike the STA-1, unlike the FCM-50T. And it's pretty fun and fairly satisfying to play, I think. However, I have to admit, though, that this tank is definitely obsoleted by things like the Scorpion G, which essentially do the same thing, just better, and have more hit points to boot. I still think this tank needs a buff, but at least it has, like, kind of something in its pocket that I can do reasonably well. Yeah, you can snipe like that at that Borsig. So, yeah, that's it. I'm probably going to take some flack for this pick, but okay. Next up, well, we're getting to the top third of the list, but the thing is, tier 8 mediums in general are kind of bad, so somehow the CDC makes number 6. But the reason why the CDC makes number 6 is because it's really not that bad of a tank. It's got a huge profile with no armor, but it's fast. It goes 65, great power to weight ratio, great gun, highest DPM in the tier, great penetration at 212 on AP shells. Like, it's solid, it makes credits. I mean, what else could you ask for? Other than maybe armor. It's 10 degrees gun depression. But the thing is, a lot of people compare the CDC to like light tanks, like the RU-251, for instance, or maybe like the light Panzer. And people ask, why would you ever play the CDC when you can play something that's smaller, has more camo, like more DPM? And the answer really is that the CDC is something that the light tanks don't. CDC has 1,450 hit points. Basically, you lose about, I'd say, like 10-15% of the combat capacity of one of those light tanks, but you can just stay in the game longer just because you have more HP to play around with. And I think that's the critical difference between the CDC and a light tank. And because you have those hit points, you can afford to make a mistake or something, and it'll punish you a lot less than if you were driving, say, a Root. So I can make these kind of careless peaks on these T-34s. And if I were driving a light tank, I'd probably be dead by now. But I'm in a CDC, so I've got a little bit more HP to play with, and that's really what I think the critical difference is. And now, in the number 5 slot, finally we've reached the top 5, where the tanks at this point are finally not complete garbage. We have the Indian Panzer. Now this tank has come a long way, because back before this thing was buffed, I would have ranked this thing much, much lower, because the Indian Panzer used to suffer from horrific aim time. Like, worse than the ISU 152 aim time. But that's more or less been fixed. So, like, the aim time and gun handling still leaves some to be desired, but it's not horrific anymore. So, good stuff there. Solid DPM as well for a tier 8 medium. I think, solid penetration, not solid accuracy. When you're fully aimed, it's very solid accuracy. It just can't snapshot as well as I would like it to. I mean, what can you really ask for? It's a German medium. The turret armor is reasonable. It'll hold up against low pen guns. Anything under like 200 millimeters of pen should generally bounce, but if they load the gold, they'll go right through, which is an issue. The mobility is okay. The hull armor can bounce a couple shots. It's even got some angled sides, so you might even get lucky if you side scrape or something. All in all, not too many faults with this tank. It's just not very spectacular. I will say, though, compared to other tier 8 mediums, the fact that it does have a nice gun does really put it above the rest, especially when you couple it with that 10 degrees gun depression and that almost passable turret armor. Now, coming in at the number 4 slot, we have the T-44. Something people have to understand about tier 8 mediums is that they're different from other tiers in that tier 8 mediums are usually slower and have a little bit more armor and are a little better suited to go toe-to-toe with heavy tanks than they are at other tiers. Like tier 7, 9, and 10, medium tanks are much faster and generally lighter armor tier for tier. The T-44 is different from other tier 8 mediums because the T-44 is a fast medium tank, like you would expect from other tiers. And actually, the T-44 is one of the fastest. It's only slower than like the CDC and the Lorraine, and those are practically not even medium tanks, which makes the T-44 quite unique. So it's almost like a light tank. It's really the Soviet tank that I think the Mod 1 and the lightweight are trying to be. Kind of that well-rounded tank with just enough armor, just squeak by, and just enough mobility to get the job done. So Mod 1 leans in terms of armor. The lightweight has speed, but I think the T-44 blends them better. And so compared to like the Mod 1, the T-44 still has a bad gun. Okay, it's better than the Mod 1 because you've got much better accuracy, which compensates for the really awful 175 millimeters of pen. You've got that 7 degrees of gun depression, which the other Soviets don't have. You've got better DPM. So it's actually a passable gun for a tier 8 medium. And again, it's got good mobility, and the hull armor is passable. It'll troll some shots. It's not reliable, but you can troll shots with them. That's the important thing. And finally, we've reached the top 3 where I think the tanks are actually finally good. Finally. After all the crap, we finally reached tanks that I actually had difficulty not deciding which one was worse, but deciding which one is better. And trying to rank these next 3 tanks was very difficult for me. So at number 3, we have the Lorraine 40T. The Lorraine 40T is hands down the best premium tank money can buy. Don't question it. Just go with the flow. But the Lorraine 40T is the only autoloader with 4 shells that actually does substantial damage. The only other one I can think of at like beyond tier 5 is the MT25, but that thing has like no alpha, so it doesn't really even count. And having that 4 shell autoloader is very nice because it means that you can be more flexible with your clip. It's very satisfying to use. You've got great pen, great accuracy, cheap shells, excellent mobility. The DPM is lackluster, but it's an autoloader, so you can get away with it. And then you've got that 900 clip potential, and that lets the Lorraine do things that other tanks simply can't. And when you couple it with the mobility, tier for tier, 900 clip potential is excellent. I mean, excellent. And then when you put it on a chassis that goes 60 kilometers an hour, this thing is a mean killing machine. So you can just tear things apart with it. Like this mod 1, I've just caught him completely in the open. He's going to lose 900 hit points. And that's something that no other tier 8 medium can really do. No other tier 8 medium can do that kind of damage. And then because you've got that mobility, you're free to just hide, relocate, do whatever during your reload. And I think that's really a game changer. I found it really hard to rank the Lorraine because it's so radically different from almost anything else in the game. I can't really think of anything else that can really compare to the Lorraine because nothing else has this big of a magazine and it goes this fast. You pair 2 of these things together, it's broken. Like this thing's pretty busted sometimes. Especially if you've got good coordination with a platoon mate. I love it. Admittedly, since this thing has no armor, it takes a little bit of finesse to play. But with that 8 degrees gun depression, once you get that play style down, this thing is fantastic. Coming in at the number 2 slot is my Seal Clubber of choice and the dark horse tier 8. It is the M26 Pershing. So the M26 Pershing is commonly underestimated because it's not flashy. There's no frills. It's not like the CDC that flies around the battlefield. It's not the Mod 1 with the massively overrated armor. It's not the Lorraine with that massive 900 clip potential. But the M26 has no weaknesses. I mean, everything about it just gets the job done. It's got enough mobility. It's like the DPM mobility, they're mediocre, but they get the job done. Better than heavy tanks. You'll take key positions early. You'll still put out the damage when you need to, especially if you pop that adrenaline. But what the M26 does have is 10 degrees gun depression, fantastic turret, fantastic gun handling, fantastic gold shell. Like, it has all these strengths, and it just has no drawbacks. So it means that no matter what situation you put your Pershing in, your Pershing will fight its way out. No problem, it'll handle it. You've got that turret armor, you've got that gun depression, so you can go toe-to-toe with the heavy tanks like no other medium can. You can still do medium tank things. You still have enough DPM and enough mobility to flank, to take key positions quickly, to spot. There's nothing the Pershing can't do. It just does exactly what you need it to. It might not be the flashiest tank ever, but it gets the job done. I mean, a lot of people like to rag on like the AP penetration of this tank, but it's 180. That's better than the 175 on like the T44, the T54 Mod 1, the T54 Lightweight. Those all have 175, so before you rag on that, like 180, it's admittedly not brilliant, but you do have that gold shell to compensate, so it's honestly fine. And really, all these things combined just mean that since the Pershing will do everything it needs to do, like it'll take those key positions, it can tank hits for the team, it can still deal the damage. Like this tank just wins. Consistent performance across the board. That's what the Pershing is all about, and that's why it makes the number 2 slot. And now we finally made it. The best tier 8 medium tank. It's the T69. Bet you didn't see that one coming. And that's because everyone forgot about the T69. Because back in the day when the T69 was the only way to get to the T57, this tank was terrible. It was absolutely awful. So everyone who ground through it thought it was awful, and rightfully so. And then the second the T49 came out, everyone ground for the T57 by going through the T49 line. So it means that no one plays the T69. And that's really a shame because it's been buffed so many times. It's been buffed like 5 times now. So it just went from one of the worst tier 8 mediums ever to the best. And so let me defend that position real quick. So first off, let's talk about the armor profile. The upper hull, it's well sloped. You'll troll some bounce with it, especially when angled. And then the turret is fantastic. It's like the 3rd best tier 8 medium tank turret, only behind like the Type 59, like the Pershing. Pretty much only behind those tanks. People think that the turret's going to be soft because they're thinking like the T54A1, the T57 Heavy, and those tanks don't have very strong turrets. But for some reason, the T69 has a great turret. Like that upper half of that oscillating turret section, that's never going to get penned really. And especially when you use that 9 degrees gun depression that this tank gets, it's almost like a kind of like a budget Pershing in effect, as far as that kind of ability to just go hull down and bounce shells like you just saw me do there. And on top of that, let's move on to mobility. It's like the 3rd fastest medium tank. It's only below the T44, the Lorraine, and the CDC. This tank goes 52 kilometers an hour with pretty solid ground resistances. Like, it'll have no problems getting to where it needs to be. It has no problems flanking things. It's brilliant. But the real shining point now is the gun, because this is what has been buffed essentially 5 times in a row, is the gun. So first off, you've got that auto loader. You can put out 675 damage in 5 seconds. So it's essentially like getting hit by an ISU 152. It's gonna hurt. But unlike other autoloaders, this autoloader doesn't suffer from a long reload. In fact, the T69 actually has a shorter reload than the IS-3 does when base. It's faster than like the 252U, so like you take a shot at the T69 with your big heavy tank and he clips out on you, and before you've got your next shot ready, that T69's already fully loaded again. It's like a single shooter, but with 675 alpha, and in fact, like the rate of fire is so fast that the T69 has the highest base DPM of all tier 8 mediums. Better than the CDC, better than the Panther II, better than the Centurion. That's how good the base DPM on this thing is. It's a ferocious fighter. Like, it'll just keep shooting and shooting until you're dead. And that's really what makes it awesome. You've got this firepower, you've got this mobility, Like, this is, if you're looking for a well-balanced tank at tier 8, the T69 is the tank you're looking for. This is what the Mod 1 was supposed to be. Because unlike the Mod 1, the T69, it's the real deal. It's actually fast, it's actually got a nice gun, it's actually got armor. And that's why the T69 is the best tier 8 medium tank. Now, people rag on the, quick note, people rag on the penetration, 170 does suck, but you can load gold rounds. Like, penetration has never really stopped a tank from being great. It's passable, honestly. And that's about all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed the video, have a wonderful day, and bye.